Welcome back, Defenders. Top story in the world continues to be the collapse of the Assad regime and the Russians being expelled from Syria. After taking Damascus, Syria's opposition begins the difficult process of trying to form a new government. The Syrian civil war is still going on. It's just the various rebel groups all decided to gang up on Assad. Now that Assad is gone, can they agree to an armistice? Can they stop fighting each other? Can they make peace and form a new government? This is yet to be determined. In the meantime, the people of Syria are celebrating. They're finally free of the Assad family. This is the largest statue to Assad's father in Damascus, and it was torn down. If you want to see the full video, I'll link it down below, but the people of Syria are celebrating, even in Damascus. Here's the port city of Latakia. They tore down the Assad statue and they're riding it around like a parade float. I'll link the video down below. This hero went into the presidential palace and stole Assad's chair. He probably shouldn't have done that, but whatever. And this is important. The Military Operations Department announced a general amnesty for all military personnel conscripted under compulsory service. Their lives are safe, and no assault on them is permitted. For the top generals and officers in Assad's military, if they haven't fled the country, they're going to be arrested, they're in trouble. But for the average conscript in Assad's army, they've been granted amnesty. They're not going to be punished for being forced into Assad's military. Who else got amnesty? Putin himself personally granted amnesty or asylum to Syria's Assad. There was this confusion for about 48 hours. Where is Assad and his family? But we now know he's in Moscow. The Russians are going to protect him and his family for the rest of their lives. As long as Putin stays in power, anyways. So at this point, Putin is just collecting deposed dictators like their Pokemon. Viktor Yanukovych and Bashar al-Assad might even share the same flat. Maybe Edward Snowden can take top bunk. This next story I debated whether or not I wanted to even mention, but I have to. I have to mention this. The Military Operations Administration issues an urgent call to all former officers and soldiers who served in the red section of the Sednaya prison, urging them to provide the codes for the underground electronic doors, as it is unable to open them. Over 100,000 detainees are visible on the surveillance cameras. Sednaya prison urgently requires international intervention to save these people trapped in an underground torture concentration camp that Assad was running. In a country of 20 million people, Assad was holding 100,000 people underground in this massive prison complex. I didn't even know about this place. I knew Assad was bad. He gassed his own people, he bombs schools and hospitals, but I had no clue that this prison was holding 100,000 human beings underground. And the pictures and videos are coming out. If you want to go on Telegram, if you want to go on Twitter, you can see them. I will spare you the pictures from the Sednaya prison. People were put in underground holes and never got to see daylight. Children and even adolescents were born there and have never seen the outside world, and they're nonverbal. They don't even talk. People were being crushed with machines down there. There are pictures and videos. I'll link this down below, but I was looking at some of the stories last night before going to bed, and I had to stop. The level of inhumanity and evil. This is who Assad was, and this is who Putin is. This is who the Ayatollahs in North Korea are. The level of evil that these people go to for pleasure and enjoyment. There's no purpose in this. If somebody's a dissident and you don't like them, you can just execute them. But to hold people underground for decades in torture chambers for fun, for pleasure, these people were never going to be released. So It really hurts the mind and hurts my soul to think there are human beings out there that do this to other human beings on such a large scale. And people on social media choose to support these leaders, these governments, when these are just mass murdering psychopaths. It's inexcusable. Syrian opposition takes full control of the Latakia province, hosting the Russian bases. This is the question. What is happening to Russia's air base and naval ports? And we've got the first statement from Kremlin State TV. This is Olga on Channel 1, and this is what they're saying. Russia does not have to fight for Syria. We are interested right now, first and foremost, in our military bases in Khmeimim and Tartus. According to Al Jazeera, the armed opposition has been in control of the second largest port city after Latakia since last night. Our bases are now on high alert, but there is no threat yet. So this is the question, what's happening to these bases? Russia withdraws their ships and weapons from Syria. If it's a ship, just leave the ports. You can protect the ship. Get as much onto the ship as you can. But what about the airbase? What about the trucks and the air defense systems and all of the heavy equipment? And at the moment, the rebels are not assaulting the bases. And I think the Russians are negotiating with the rebel groups, saying, don't attack our bases, we're trying to evacuate. If you attack us, well, now we're fighting. So if you're the rebels and your enemy voluntarily wants to leave, you don't need to agitate them. You don't need to attack them. If the Russians are trying to get out, you can just let them leave. You don't have to risk airstrikes being called in on your positions. So at the moment, the rebels are not attacking these bases because the Russians are trying to get out. Russia is seeking Turkish help evacuating their soldiers from Syria. There are all of these videos surfacing online of Russian convoys scrambling to abandon their positions, and they're either trying to be airlifted out, but that's very inefficient, but they're actually trying to get across the border. Here is the airbase near Latakia. The naval port is down here near Tartus, and the Russians are trying to get across the border into Turkey with Turkey's permission, and they're just going to hang out there until they can be airlifted out at some point in the future. And Turkey's okay with this, I think. And friend of the channel, Ryan Macbeth, made this comparison, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I'm sorry if you've not seen Game of Thrones and you don't know who Peter Baelish or Littlefinger is, but Erdogan of Turkey is basically this guy. He is both supporting and helping to destroy everyone. He's everyone's ally and their enemy at the same time. Turkey is the one who just caused the Assad regime to collapse. Turkey is the reason why Russia is going to lose this important naval and air base. But Russia can't be openly hostile to Turkey because they still need Turkey. So the official government of Russia is not being critical of Erdogan. But for the average citizen like Alexander Dugin, he knows who's really responsible for this defeat. Syria was a trap for Erdogan. He has made a strategic mistake. He has betrayed Russia. He has betrayed Iran. He is doomed. Now the end of Kemal's Turkey has begun. We have supported you until now. From now on, you'll repent. No, I don't think Turkey cares. I don't think they're worried about what Alexander Dugin has to say. The Kremlin has already flipped on Assad and their governments. The Russians have stopped calling the Syrian rebels terrorists and have started calling them groups of the Syrian opposition with whom they're in contact with. They've already established official diplomatic relations. This is how fast Moscow can arrange with true realities on the ground. And this is exactly what will happen when Russia is defeated in Ukraine. There won't be World War III. There will be true realities on the ground, which show that Russian red lines never really existed, only in the heads of weak people. So these bases, will the insurgents take these two bases. And I think eventually they will. I think the rebels, as long as it looks like they're leaving, they're going to let them leave. But there's no way the Russians can stay here. Everybody knows what the Russians have been doing. When the rebels started advancing last week, the Russians called in airstrikes, not to attack the rebels, but just to bomb every hospital in Syria. The Russians didn't know how to stop the rebel advance. So the Russians just do what the Russians always do, and they started bombing all the hospitals to maximize human suffering and misery. Yeah, I don't think the rebel groups are going to let the Russians keep these bases. Another factor in this equation, which is crazy to think about, is Israel. And Israel is now striking military targets in Syria. They're not targeting the Russians. They're targeting ships and planes and helicopters that used to belong to Assad's government, and they don't want the rebels to get their hands on them. These rebel groups are probably going to be hostile to Israel, so Israel is proactively trying to disarm the future government of Syria, not allowing any of these ships or helicopters or planes to be taken over by the rebels. There are videos online if you want to see the destruction of the ships and the planes. Israel is just going to do whatever Israel wants, and this is probably a good thing. I don't think these rebels need any more heavy equipment. On top of that, the U.S. military has carried out dozens of precision airstrikes against terrorist camps. I don't want to say the word, but you know which group. And the operations struck over 75 targets using Air Force assets, including B-52s, F-15s, and A-10s. Battle damage assessments are underway, and there are no indications of civilian casualties. Nobody likes these people. If the United States wants to take out 75 targets in these, unfriendly group camps, the rebels don't care. The Russians don't care. Nobody cares. But it's interesting that the United States knew where all of these targets were, and they haven't been striking them. They haven't been striking them because Assad and the Russians didn't want the United States to do it. The Russians and Assad's government were protecting these people just to promote chaos in the region, to keep the civil war going, to off-balance the rebels. Assad thought their existence was helping them. In my last video, I did mention that the Iranian embassy was stormed. This was the Iranian embassy in Damascus. There is a video, I'll link it down below, and I don't know who went in there. I don't know what intelligence they got, but I'm sure Iran is not happy about this. Russia takes a political, military, and economic hit as Syria's Assad falls from power. This is what the Russian military bloggers are starting to figure out, how important it is that they were able to use this air and naval base in Syria. This is the Russian military group on Telegram, Rybar. And they're showing, they're proud of their empire and how they're able to project and topple all of these governments in Africa. Now, Syria was important, but according to this chart, there's a air base they're allowed to use in Libya. So Libya is now the midway point for all of their operations in Africa. We need these operations to end. This is causing a refugee crisis and instability in sub-Saharan Africa. But obviously Russia is in Africa to make a profit. They're trying to gain control of gold mines and diamond mines and anything of value so that they can get hard currency to wage war on Ukraine. If we can make this connection somehow disappear, then Russia will lose prestige, but also a source of revenue to keep their wars going forever. I also do want to mention that if Syria can somehow stabilize and become peaceful, then the Gulf states, the UAE, Qatar, and maybe even Saudi Arabia, they might be able to start building pipelines through Jordan and Syria to go through Turkey and then onto the European continent. The Russians didn't want this to happen. The Russians want Europe to be dependent on their energy exports and gas. So by keeping Syria destabilized, by keeping Syria violent, the Gulf states were never able to build this pipeline to Europe. On top of this, Iran doesn't want this pipeline either, because they want ships leaving the Persian Gulf to go through the Straits of Hormuz. This is Iran's threat to close the straits and then choke the world of energy imports. We need to build this pipeline. This pipeline is very important for global security. Obviously, Europe should try to become energy independent with renewable energies and nuclear power, but that could take time. And if they wanted to build this pipeline and it was a priority, they could probably do it pretty fast. So here's the story that is important to understand. Because of the Russians and Assad in Syria, millions of Syrians had to flee the country. They were refugees in other parts of the world. With Assad now gone, these people want to return home. These are Syrians who want to live in their home country, but they couldn't for fear of persecution. So here's the road from Turkey into Syria as Syrian refugees are trying to return home to their cities and families. If you're European and you're upset about immigrants or refugees coming to Europe, then oppose the Russians. Help Ukraine defeat Russia, because Russia is behind all of these destabilizing events in the world, all of these coups in Africa. They're triggering refugees to come to Europe. The Russians support Maduro in Venezuela. Venezuelan refugees have been flooding into the United States. The Russians, directly or indirectly, are behind most of this instability, and if Russia can be defeated, then there won't be as severe of a refugee crisis around the world. Here's strong language from the Polish Prime Minister. Syria's Assad ouster proves Russian allies can be defeated. For everyone living in the West who supports Ukraine, the last 2 weeks have been a tremendous morale boost, seeing real, tangible weakness from the Russians. The Russians are too weak to save Assad, too weak to hold on to these military bases in Syria. And this shows Russia and their allies can be defeated. We could be close to the end here. Here are thoughts from President Zelensky. I want to read this. The fall of the Assad regime wasn't just the result of strength of opposition forces. It also happened because Russia doesn't have sufficient troops there. Why? Because the entire combat-ready Russian army is currently on Ukrainian territory. This clearly shows that the entire army of this pseudo-empire is currently waging war against the Ukrainian people. The same is already happening in Africa. We know that Wagner mercenaries were active there. We know how many Wagner fighters were eliminated in Ukraine. Russia seeks to establish its own regimes in Africa to influence the continent, using Wagner forces for this purpose. That is why it is crucial today for all countries that value peace without war, that value security, European nations, the United Nations, other countries around the world, global leaders, to understand this perspective. Now, right here, many things are being decided. The strength of Ukraine determines whether Russia's army is strong. If Ukraine falls, Putin will return to Syria to seek revenge, to Africa, and to many other regions that interest him. I believe it is essential for everyone to understand this. Unity around Ukraine is the key to success, the shared success of the world, a success that unites, and unity that brings success. Russia's behind almost everything. All of the forever wars, all of the hotspots currently occurring. And if you want greater levels of peace in the world, greater levels of stability, then support Ukraine. Help Ukraine defeat the Russians and eliminate this Putin, this threat from Putin's regime once and for all. Here are thoughts from Ambassador Michael McFaul. Putin's closest ally in the Middle East was just ousted. Putin did not escalate to try to save him. He didn't use a nuclear weapon. He didn't even fight. He just retreated. When the world shows strength, when the Russians are met with strength, they just back down every time. The other story we should talk about, I was correct. President Trump 2 days ago tweeted out these numbers. I was pretty confident these were the classified or U.S. classified estimates for casualties in Ukraine. And I think the new rule with Trump is anytime he says something that's classified, it's officially been declassified. And anyone can say it now. So Zelensky more or less confirmed this. 43,000 Ukrainian troops dead, 370,000 injured since 2022. It's terrible. It's horrendous. 43,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed, 370,000 wounded. Sounds about accurate for 3 years of fighting. The Ukrainians do a much better job of saving their wounded, stabilizing, evacuating, and taking care of them. Whereas the Russians don't really do that. I'll link this video down below. I can't share it because it shows combat footage, but this is a Russian soldier's wife confessing to an interview, and I've seen these reports. When Russian soldiers find wounded comrades, they don't try to save them. They don't have the military personnel. They don't have the anesthesia or equipment. So they just execute their own. When they find a Russian soldier with some shrapnel in his leg and he can't walk, rather than try to evacuate them, they just put a bullet in their heads. This is what the Russians do to their own. They call it cleanup, and they say it must be done for the safety of their comrades. Wounded people, en masse, can cause a lot of havoc. They're kind of demoralizing to listen to and look at. I mean, these are your countrymen, but the Russians just don't value anyone's life, even their own. So how many troops has Russia lost? Russia has lost about 700,000 people. This is killed, captured, and wounded since February of 2022, and they've spent over $200 billion on this war. This has been a disaster by every metric. Anyone trying to argue or convince you that Russia is somehow winning this war, they're an idiot, or they're lying to you. Objectively, this has been a disaster the last 3 years for the Russians. So let's check in on the front lines with an average Russian troop. This is a Russian soldier complaining about the new contract soldiers they're being given, and they're not exactly spring chickens. Another short video for those who think that we receive proper contract soldiers. Quality. In 2023, yes, but now here's Mikhailich, born in 1965. So let me do some math here. This man is almost 60 years old. Signed his contract literally 14 days ago. The man is tired of fighting already, and he's had enough. Obviously, he has his own issues, which we won't get too involved with. I'm guessing he's got joint problems or back problems. Everyone has problems. There are no decent, healthy people here, even among the mobilized. So we have people born in 1965, 10 years older than me. So if that guy's 60, this guy is 50. F. Yeah, that sounds about right. At this point, you know, if you're in your 60s and you're signing a contract to go to the front lines in Ukraine, you're going to die. You know that. And you're just doing it for the death benefit to set your wife up for retirement or to help your kids or your grandkids. This is who's going to the front lines for Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine's Sea Baby Marine drones, armed with heavy caliber machine guns, damage a Russian helicopter near Crimea. So Ukraine sends out their drone boats to hunt for Russian ships and assets, and Russia will scramble helicopters to sink them And this drone boat had a machine gun on it and was able to fire back at the helicopter. I'll link the video down below. The helicopter didn't go down, but it was damaged. And I guess Russia doesn't feel too confident anymore about scrambling their helicopters when they see a drone boat. Blast kills former head of infamous prison in Russian-occupied Ukraine. This was the former director of the infamous Russian prison camp where 53 Ukrainian POWs were murdered in July of 2022. He was living in occupied Donetsk and somebody got to him. I'll link the video down below. Here's a quick story I want to mention. Transnistria to declare state of emergency due to cessation of Russian gas supply. I didn't see this coming, but perhaps the next Russian ally to fall will be the puppet government in Transnistria. This border region has less than 500,000 people, but Russia for 30 years has been keeping it going. Their financial aid, their energy imports. Russia has been propping up this, I don't even know how to describe the people of Transnistria, but if the money stops because Russia can't afford to support them anymore, then maybe we can kick these Russian troops out and Moldova can get all of their territory back. They can reunify and de-Russify these crazy people who have been living exclusively off Russian propaganda for the last 30 years. Candidate for German chancellorship from conservative bloc went to Ukraine. This man's name is Friedrich Merz, and he is the leader of the Christian Democratic Union. This is the opposition party in Germany. Germany's having elections in a couple months, and I don't think Chancellor Scholz's party is going to remain in charge of the government. So this German leader might potentially be the next chancellor, and he has strong support for Ukraine. He did hint that maybe if he's elected, Germany will provide Taurus cruise missiles for Ukraine. It's interesting. Ukraine latest, this is official as of this morning. The United States has sent the $20 billion from the G7 loan to Ukraine as general support. These are frozen Russian assets that will be repaid to the G7 countries with the interest accumulating on the assets. This has been talked about for like 2 years now, but it's finally happened. Ukraine has the money, and they can use this to stabilize their governments. This is very important because nobody's giving the Russians free money. Okay, guys, we've officially closed the Bro Christmas Convoy campaign, and the final total, $1,231,337.91. 13,835 heroes donated. It's incredible. We were able to get that extra 200,000 to buy an additional 10 trucks. So in total, we will be sending to Ukraine 40 trucks from this convoy. And the guys in Estonia have already started spending the money, purchasing and fixing up trucks. As you can see from this truck, it says Jake064. And we're going to 100 before the funds for this campaign are all spent. The guys sent me this video, so let me share this with you.
Here she is. The F-16. Lovely. What's this? This is... yeah, that's Jake number 63.
Wow. Okay, that's all for this update video. Thank you so much for being a part of this community and continuing to support Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.